Wes Goldberg, cold open question of the day for you. Bit of news in the NBA world is Magic center Wendell Carter Jr. has extended on a 3-year, $59 million contract. What do you think of this deal?
It's fine. 19, $20 million a year on average for a pretty decent center. That's sort of the going rate for centers of Wendell Carter Jr.'s uh, ability and ilk. But they have now, the Magic have re-signed basically all of their centers, right? They've got Wendell Carter Jr. under contract. They re-signed Goga Batadze. They re-signed Mo Wagner. They still have Jonathan Isaac, who signed an extension, I think last year it was. So they've got a lot of guys at that position. So it feels like they're a team that's probably going to be making a consolidation trade, which is fine. They have a bunch of quality guys at the position. Might as well use those assets instead of losing some of them for nothing. My biggest question is, why isn't the Jalen Suggs contract extension done? Like, the
Yeah.
Wendell Carter Jr. thing is fine, but that dude, Jalen Suggs, is central, critical to what it is that the Orlando Magic do defensively. And they cannot risk him getting into restricted free agency next year. They need to get something done. I think Bobby Marks had it out there that maybe something around the 25 to $30 million per year range for Jalen Suggs could be where they land. I got a fun fact for you, Chris.
Hit
Like,
me.
there's going to be a contender next year willing to pay Jalen Suggs $30+ million a year annually. So, if in restricted free agency, so if the Magic can't get something done with him, there is a very real chance that they could lose him next summer if they're not willing to go above and beyond. So, I don't know. I don't know why this extension hasn't gotten done yet. Um, the front office in Orlando has been a little not totally transparent on what's going on in that situation. So we'll see, but that's got to be the top priority for the Orlando Magic at this point.
I love that you went there because I think if I'm framing it, extending one of those two guys, and obviously, you can do both or whatever, but Jalen Suggs is more important to this team's long term future than Wendell Carter Jr.
No doubt.
I would rather have Jalen Suggs on my team the next 4 or 5 years than I would Wendell Carter Jr. It's not that Wendell Carter Jr. is bad, but when I think about what this team is, particularly with Paolo, particularly with Franz, and even Suggs, I think kind of perhaps lacking some 3-point spacing, kind of needing to find a way to squeeze shooters in where you can. It's like the center spot might be a spot where you want to get a different shooter, or you just want to have really cheap Wagner and Batadze, kind of your block there, just to be these rim running, big bodied centers who you kind of ride the hot hand a little bit, depending who's playing better for a stretch. And then you use that money on on a shooter, or you use that money to give Jalen Suggs the contract he's going to deserve. I feel like Wendell Carter Jr. maybe not this year, but if the Magic in a year, like, we need to change this roster out. We got the KCP thing this year. We ran it back pretty much otherwise. What's the Wendell Carter Jr. plus Jonathan Isaac salary trade that can take us to the
Mhm.
next level? Is like where my head goes with this team.
Yeah, and look, going back to Jalen Suggs quickly though, you're absolutely right. He is critical to what this team wants to do. I would argue that the hardest thing to find in the NBA, and that's not to say it's the most valuable thing in the NBA, but the hardest thing to find is a guard who can defend his position at an elite level.
Yes.
There's maybe 5 of those guys, 6 of those guys in the entire NBA. Jalen Suggs might be the best at it, and he
Hmm.
probably will be within the next couple of years. This guy's awesome as a defender. He shot 40% from three last year. That is such a hard player to find. No, he's not a lead ball handler. He's not a shot creator. He's not an advantage creator on offense. But that's Paolo's job. That's Franz's job. And we could debate whether or not, and people have, should the Orlando Magic have gone out and done more to bolster their offense, got a real ball handler, a primary shot creator, a playmaker, those kinds of guys. And maybe they should have, but I don't know that guy was out there. Like Anthony Simons, Malik Monk, that's not doing it for me if I'm the Magic. And so there is a consolidation trade. Maybe that player becomes available at some point, and then that's when you start stacking those contracts that you were just talking about, Wendell Carter, Jonathan Isaac, something like that. When that player becomes available, the Magic now have the things that they can move to go get that guy. I don't think that guy was out there for them this summer, so I think that they were right in being patient. But then again, they do have to take care of business. So far, they have. They got Franz Wagner on the extension. They got Wendell Carter Jr. on the extension. They re-signed their centers. They added KCP. Like, they've done most of their business, but it's not done yet. Their homework isn't done yet, and the regular season is around the corner. Now, when the regular season starts, it doesn't mean that Jalen Suggs can't sign that extension. He can sign it at any point, but they should get it done before that season starts.
Yeah, Totally agreed. All right, on today's show, East over-unders, all via our friends at BetMGM. Let's dive in.
Oh, a spectacular move by Michael Jordan. Oh, LeBron James with no regard for human life.
It is the Just Basketball Show for October 11th. I'm Chris Manning. That is Wes Goldberg. If you haven't already, follow, rate, review on your podcast app platform of choice. Hit subscribe on the Just Basketball Fans YouTube channel and check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and X. I want to tell you about today's sponsor, and that is BetMGM. Support for today's episode of the Just Basketball Show comes from BetMGM. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code JustBasketball, and you'll get up to $1,500 in a first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here is how it works. Step 1, download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android and sign up using code JustBasketball. Step 2, deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. Step 3, you will receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if the bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code JustBasketball when you sign up. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 21 or older to wager. Terms and conditions apply. West, East over-unders, all again via our friends at BetMGM. We're going to go alphabetical. Start with the Atlanta Hawks. 36.5 is the win total. Over at -105. Under at -115. Where are you at on the Atlanta Hawks?
Sorry, 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
All good, dog.
We're all working
Okay.
from home today.
Yeah, it's good. That's I'll count back in. Okay. We'll just we'll redo I'll bring it back in, post the ad, and we'll
Okay.
easier cut. All right, we'll go in 3, 2, 1. All right, BetMGM over-unders, Wes. We're gonna go through these in conference today. Atlanta Hawks up first because we're going alphabetical. They're at 36.5. Over is -105. The under is -115. The post DeJounte Murray trade, Atlanta Hawks. Where are you at?
So they won 36 games last year with DeJounte Murray.
Uh-huh.
You look. The reason they traded DeJounte Murray is because there was no tangible difference when they had DeJounte Murray and Trae Young on the court versus when they had one of them on the court absent the other one. So essentially, if you just want to do this with the math, then nothing really should change here for the Atlanta Hawks, right? Like, no DeJounte Murray doesn't really mean anything for this team. Now, I'm not sure I completely buy that. I think you lost a good chunk of talent in losing DeJounte Murray, even if the fit wasn't right. If something happens to Trae Young, like it did last year for a portion, you don't have DeJounte Murray to run your offense and do all those things the way that he was able to do last year. And so, considering that they were at 36 wins last year, they didn't really do anything to improve the team. Jalen Johnson should be healthier this year, but even if despite his individual promise and the kind of mini leap that he took last year, and maybe he's in for a breakout this next year, none of that stuff exactly resulted into wins last year. They were still, I think they were below 500 even the games that Jalen Johnson played last season. So all of that is to say, I think the Hawks' position is extremely precarious. I think they're one injury away from being like a 25-win team. Right? Trae Young misses 2 weeks with a hamstring injury or something. That could be the end of their season. They can miss the play-in tournament, the whole thing. I have zero faith in them. I would feel really anxious about taking the over on them because they might not hit that over on 36.5 until like the last week of the season. So I'm going under on the Atlanta Hawks.
I'm there as well. I think, maybe they get a Dyson Daniels kind of upgrade for him. Maybe Jalen Johnson's a breakout. That could help them in a big way. But, Wes, I look at this roster, and I think this could be a seller in terms of Bogdanovich, in terms of
Clint Capella,
in terms of Larry Nance. Like, they have, like a bunch of veterans who are out of line, even with Trae, much less if we get into, like, a Trae trade. Trae is closer to... Yeah,
what would they say if a front office called about Onyeka Okongwu, who seems like a core, like, cornerstone piece of this organization a few years ago, has not exactly taken that turn? Like, if there's a team willing to say, you know what, we'll give you a first-round pick for Okongwu, maybe, and something else, like, Would the Hawks say no to that? Like, it feels like even Trae Young feels like he could be dealt, right? Everybody on this roster feels like they could be traded.
Everyone, but like honestly, I could see where everyone but Jalen Johnson and Dyson Daniels and Risa Shea is like on the table to some degree, and that just makes me teams that are selling scream under to me, and I lean under in Atlanta as well. Let's go to Boston. I think this is one of the more interesting debates we're gonna have, Wes, because 58.5, even odds at -110. 58.5 is just like a lot of wins for a team that won't have Kristaps Porzingis for a while, we think. Just won the title. Doesn't really like need to push it in the regular season. And like had pretty good injury luck for the most part last year, aside from Porzingis. Like I there's just something in me that looks at 58.5 and thinks I want to go over. But the East is better, and like they're just like a little bit like if things are a little bit less pristine, do they get there? I'm not sure, but I'm thinking about the under, but I haven't. This might be a stay away for me.
I feel pretty good about the over on this one. So this is our first disagreement. Yeah, Kristaps Porzingis
on either
is
pod,
hurt.
I think.
Maybe ever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kristaps Porzingis only played 57 games in the regular season last year, and the
That's
Boston
true.
Celtics still blew away this over under. Now, Al Horford is a year older. He's going to be on probably a maintenance program, but they have Cornette, they have Xavier Tillman, they have guys. There's just, and I do get the sense out of Boston that this is not a team that is going to rest on its laurels, right? I think the message from Joe Mazzulla in training camp in the preseason has been very realistic in terms of, look, ownership is selling. This might be the last year we're all together this way. This might be the last year we're this dominant. We got to go for it. I don't get the sense from a Joe Mazzulla coach team and from this Celtics team that still has a chip on its shoulder somehow, that they're going to say, you know what, we know who we are, we're good, like we don't need to worry about the regular season. I think this team is still going to go out there with something to prove, which I think is a good thing, especially when it comes to these over-unders. They blew this out of the water last year at 64 wins. They're at 58.5. I don't know. I would feel really icky taking the under on this, right? Like it's still the Celtics, and
Yeah.
as long as Kristaps Porzingis comes back in like January, I think this team is going to be over 500 before he gets back, and they're going to probably be dominant when he does get back. The East has gotten better, yes, but they've gotten better at the top, and I still think the Celtics are the best team at the top. The East has not gotten necessarily better in the bottom five. Like when we did our West over-unders, that was a big part of this was, at least in terms of the Western Conference, was, yeah, there's just not that many easy wins to gobble up and stack your resume with. In the East, you could argue there's more. And so I just think that the Celtics are going to, despite the injury concerns, despite the fact that they're coming off of the championship, I think they're going to go over 58.5, and I feel pretty good about it.
Okay. You've kind of sold me. I just want to point out one thing. I was doing my research for this and was reading a CBS Sports breakdown of over-unders just to kind of check myself.
Mm-hmm.
They had this note. Only 2 teams ever have repeated 64-win seasons. One of them had Michael Jordan. One of them had Stephen Curry. It's just like a rarity to repeat 64. Now, the over-under is, 5.5 wins less than 64. Could they get to 61?
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go over with you as well, but
I feel good about 60.
okay.
Like if this was 60.5, that would be way tougher. But you're giving me, you're basically giving me 2 wins that I feel pretty good about.
I'm going to go under, actually, just because I want us to be different, but I hear you on the over.
Well, we don't have to do that. We're not going to keep track of this, are we?
Oh, I am.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. I don't know if we're putting this out on social or anything, but like I'm gonna at least like see who. Wes, I believe you're smarter than me, but I'm gonna track this. All right, Brooklyn Nets 19.5, -115 the over. Unders -105. Wes, I'm going the under. I'm thinking 16 wins for the Brooklyn Nets. I think this team is gonna be so ass.
I am also going under on this. Their best player is Nick Claxton, who is a good player. Nothing against Nick Claxton. Not the kind of player who results in wins, right? The kind of player who you'd like to have around other good players. Cam Thomas, that's cool and everything. He's leading your offense. That's a bad sign, dude. And like this is also a team, like you mentioned with Atlanta. This is a team that seems ripe for a few trades, right? Like, what's Dorian Finney-Smith doing on this roster? What's Cam Johnson doing on this roster? Those guys are great trade candidates between now and February. There is going to be a contender that takes an injury to a wing and says, you know what, we need to shore up our defense. We need some 3-and-D kind of guys. You know, the contract on Cam Johnson might not look great. Dorian Finney-Smith might be on the other side of his prime, but you know what? Let's just go grab those guys because they'll help us for this playoff run. Those guys I'm going to bet are going to get traded by the end of the year. They don't finish the year on the Brooklyn Nets roster. So the thing with this, Chris, and here's a scary statement.
Ben Simmons?
Ben Simmons. How good does Ben Simmons have to be for Brooklyn to clear the over at 19.5 wins? And I would argue really damn good because that's how bad this roster is.
Did you see this Nets like free throw thing? Did you see this? They were like doing like scoring for their free throws in training camp. Like they were doing like golf scoring for free throws. I saw this on Instagram. Maybe it's totally possible I hallucinated this, but like Ben Simmons was like at the bottom of the list by like a wide margin. And
in terms of making free throws,
in terms of like his score, it was like there was like they were scoring and he was.
And
like,
the Brooklyn Nets social media put this out.
Someone like a media person like posted it, like saw like it at practice and posted it, and I was like, oh, okay,
that's not great.
No, there's nothing.
I don't know if you saw, but Ben Simmons has been in the lab this summer. Taking step-back three-pointers.
I just want to say I feel like a lot of empathy for Ben Simmons and like how he's had his career just like having your life in your career and your identity and like value in terms of how people talk about you just like disintegrate in front of your eyes publicly can't be easy mentally. He's also just like on the worst contract basically in the NBA and like not a useful player. And
he's also not helping himself. I mean, he's posting like most of Ben Simmons' basketball happens on Instagram. He's not helping himself with this. He's become like basketball influencer more than basketball player. I don't know what he's doing here. And every summer we get I've been in the lab, look out for the big year. Chris Brickley comes out and says, you don't understand Ben Simmons. He's coming back. He's healthy. Never looked better. Like you get this every single year and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And when I watch videos of him taking step-back three-pointers against nobody, I'm like, who is this for? Because it's not for the Brooklyn Nets. What I want to see the Ben Simmons do is shooting shots under the basket, making free throws. Let me see an unedited video of him making 10 straight free throws.
Okay, I don't. Yeah, is that possible? Is the question? I think
that's what he needs to be working on. That's what he's going to be doing in these NBA games. He's not going to be taking step-back threes.
If we were to launch like the just basketball version of McKinsey and like advise basketball NBA players and WNBA players on how to handle social, I would. There's like a ton of players.
Ooh, that's a good segment. Let's do that.
All right, we'll do
social media consultants.
Yeah,
on the Just Basketball Show. Okay, this was the first version of it.
Here's our basic pitch for me for Ben Simmons. Just don't ever post again. Like delete. Like just go dark. If you want to burn our Instagram or a Finsta because you're like want to meet people on the road because that's what NBA players do or like whatever. But like don't go on Twitter. Don't post any workout clips to Instagram. No TikTok posts or dances or anything. Like just no. I want nothing from you. If any, the only thing I would accept is like a Substack running diary of your season.
So I don't know that I would say don't do anything because he's already not doing anything on the basketball court. So the only way for him to be relevant within the basketball space is to actually post on Instagram. I would argue, if I'm consulting, do something that shows us that that your priorities are in the right place, and just post a video of making 10 straight free throws. Post videos of putbacks, the putback drill and all the tip drills, all that stuff. That's what I want to see, right? That's the kind of stuff I want to see. Getting massages on your lower back, so to let us acupuncture, like that you're taking care of yourself. That's more of what I want to see. Like not these James Harden impressions. Like I don't know who wants that. That's not for anybody. So, but I like this as a social media consultant. We gotta figure out a way to do this throughout the year.
Yeah. We'll be available. We'll figure this out. All right. Charlotte Hornets up next. 30.5. Over is at -105. The under is at -115. Wes, can I hear you on this one first? Because I am both like I am like torn very hard on this one because I almost want to believe. I'm like working myself into Charles Lee and LaMelo Ball and the first preseason game he put up some crazy numbers early on and Brandon Miller and like I like some of the pieces on this team overall. And yet I just am like, it's the Charlotte Hornets, and like, do I really trust LaMelo? Is just like where my head is at. I'm so torn on this one.
So you know my rule here, and
Yeah.
I'm sure our audience knows my rule here by now. I have 2 rules in the NBA. Never trust the Clippers. Don't watch the Hornets after February. Chris, I'm here to tell you,
You breaking the rule?
I'm amending the rule.
Oh, we need to hit the button, Wes. Hit the button.
Let me pull it up. I am amending the rule. I am going to be watching the Hornets this season, all season. I like the Charlotte Hornets team. I'm buying in. I watched their 2 preseason games.
Okay.
LaMelo Ball looks great. Brandon Miller looks great. Charles Lee has this team playing the right way. And by the way, when LaMelo has been even relatively healthy, every time he's played more than 50 games, the Hornets have cleared this. 33 wins and 43 wins. That's not a contender. It's not even a real playoff team. But it's more than 30 and a half wins by a pretty decent margin. And I think they're better than ever. I think Brandon Miller and Bridges looks good now that he's back. I kind of think that Charlotte is going to be the play-in team in the Eastern Conference. I think they're going to win 35, 36, 37 games this year. So I love the over on this. And to me, it's my first lock of the day. I feel really strongly about Charlotte clearing this.
Your
now,
first
the only reason
lock on the Charlotte Hornets is not a sentence I expected to hear when we fired up the mics.
Well, maybe Boston would probably be my first lock. But the only thing that could go wrong for Charlotte is another LaMelo Ball injury. But everything that you're hearing out of Charlotte is that he's good. He's wearing the ankle braces now under the socks in his shoes and all this stuff. So I think he's taking the right steps. He has a reputation of getting hurt because largely he has been hurt. But I don't need him to play. We're not talking about Charlotte being a playoff team or a contender or anything like that. I just need him to play 50 games. 50-plus games, 55 games, 60 games. And I feel like Charlotte has a really good chance of clearing the 30.5 win mark. So I'm going to go over on this.
All right, I'm gonna go over as well. I think you're right about, even if I'm I think my LaMelo skepticism, if I'm gonna kind of break it down, is not that he can help them be better if he's healthy. It's like, where does he at the highest upper echelon of the league?
Mm-hmm.
And that is not the question here. Can he help them win 35 games? Is a different question than can he get his team into the Eastern Conference Finals? And we're a ways away from the latter one even being a question. So, all right, let's go over here. All right, Chicago Bulls. 27.5. The over is at -125. The under is at +105 in West. I know it's not favored here. It's the plus money. I'm going the under on the Bulls. I don't like this team. Levine and Vooch are both just guys that could be traded. Levine, again, could be hurt again. DeRozan was one of the most clutch players in the league, bailing them out over the last couple of years, and now he's in Sacramento. I like Kobe White, but is Kobe White generating a ton of wins through? I don't know. They have a lot of young guys. They need to let Buzelis and even Patrick Williams to some degree, even though they extended him, and Josh Giddey. There's just a lot of, I think, room here for them to experiment and focus on the future and sell. And if they can move Zach LaVine, they're going to do it. I don't think this team has a real incentive to chase that over this year at a certain point. I think this team is a 25-win team at the end of the year.
I think I'm with you. I'm going under on this. Who's Chicago's best player?
It's Levine, but that says something about your team, right? Zach LaVine being your best guy in 2024, 2025 is a real indictment on what your team is.
I think Zach LaVine is a solid player, but he's kind of being sidelined on this team. The media day questions, everything that he's been saying, he's like, look, I'm not going to get in the way of the growth of the young guys, all these things. He's saying all the right stuff, and he's saying all the right stuff, by the way, so that somebody will trade for him because he doesn't want to be there. Why would he want to be there? The Chicago Bulls don't want him there, and he doesn't make any sense on this roster. So even though Zach LaVine is your best player, he's sort of being marginalized on this roster, and so he's not going to be functionally their best player. And so I think functionally this team is going to run through Kobe White, who I think is solid, right? But what are we talking about? We're talking about maybe the 80th best player in the NBA in Kobe White, maybe? I don't even know if he's that high. Patrick Williams, he needs to take a huge step. Nikola Vucevic, his best basketball seems to be behind him. Josh Giddey, I think, is a solid addition for them. I didn't hate the Alex Caruso trade as much as most people, but he's not exactly a guy who turns things into winning. He could be a building block into whatever it is that comes next for the Bulls. So you're going under, I'm going under, and I think the Chicago Bulls would be very happy going under. They're finally sort of pulled the plug on this thing. I think they'd really love to be in on the Cooper flag. We did that whole show a couple weeks ago. If they went the under, I think they'd all be happy. So I'm going under on this as well.
Yeah, Zach LaVine is the best person we have in the league that could be like if they did loans, like if they could loan a guy out and just like figure out the salary stuff, like he would be number one K in the league for like another team to like the Lakers get the loan out to have Zach LaVine on loan for a year, and it would make sense for both parties. Like you just you cover some of the salary and you just figure out like an exemption in the salary cap for like one loan a year, and I think it would make these teams better. I fully believe that.
Your team.
I'm nuking the over, Wes. I already did it. The Cleveland Cavaliers. 48.5. The over is at -115. The under is at -105. Look, still concerns big picture, I think, about the playoff run and where they're going to be. Evan Mobley, first preseason game, looking pretty great. I think this team is going to win like 51, 52 games, and I feel pretty good about that. I've already, again, nuked the over. I did 3 units on them to hit the over. I'm believing.
So, is that the sell then? Because Cleveland 48 wins last year, 51 wins the year before that. So that's what they've done with Donovan Mitchell since making that trade. 48.5 is the over under. So Vegas nailed this in terms of
as they tend to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that the sales pitch? Is that Evan Mobley is going to take that next step and we got a new coach and he's going to do good things? Is that really the pitch here to go over?
I think also just more normal of a season. Like Mobley got hurt last year. Garland had this season from hell last year. I think he'll be better. I think Mitchell again will be really good. I think there's a trade to be made somewhere to kind of make this roster make a little more sense, even if it's just like a Karis LeVert trade at some point to bring in a shooter or some kind of wing. And I do just think the new coach, in terms of vibe and in terms of offensive flow, is going to make a huge difference in what this team is going to be. Like, I think J.B. Bickerstaff got the most he could out of that team, but I think by the end of last year, he lost that locker room. And, Wes, you know this. Everyone who follows the league knows this. Once a coach kind of, like, loses his grip on connecting with the team, it's over, and you can dock wins for that. And I think Atkinson, with what he's going to do offensively, is going to make this really, really hum in a good way.
Last year was really strange for Cleveland because you got a couple of factors there. You mentioned they'll be healthier, but they actually stacked a bunch of wins when Darius Garland got hurt, right? And so that injury was almost beneficial for them in terms of like regular season success, winning games. And then Donovan Mitchell was in a contract year last year. Now he's got the new extension. Does that hurt or help his regular season production, right? Because you could argue not in a contract year, he's not going to take the regular season as seriously anymore. He's not going to go full tilt. He'll save all that stuff for the playoffs. You could also argue he's comfortable, doesn't have to worry about his future. That security should result in better regular season play, and nothing should really change. I don't know. I'm on the fence on this one. I'm going to go over slightly. Like it might be 49, 50 wins. I'll go over because this team has tended to win more games during the Donovan Mitchell era. I think Atkinson's a good coach. Here's the problem is that in the East, you only had 2 teams win 50 games last year. You had 4 teams win 50 games in the previous 2 years. I think we're going to go back to 4 teams winning 50 games in the Eastern Conference this year. I'm not sure we're going to get to 5. That feels like a lot for the East, but maybe we can. So in terms of my 4 teams that are going to win 50 plus, I've got Boston, and I've got a few others, and Cleveland is on that short list. So are they going to clear it? I don't know. I'm not as confident as you, but I'll agree with you. I'll go over on Cleveland.
I think they're feasting on the bottom of some of these bad teams in the East, and I just think they're going to be a regular season wins machine. And then, like, we're going to have the same question.
There's a lot of talent, man. Like, if they're healthy and they could basically have 2 all-star or close to all-star caliber players on the court at all times, the way they stagger their rotation, if they decide to do it that way, there's a way to win a lot of minutes in the regular season for them, and that tends to result in a lot of wins. So, we're both taking the over here, and you're the expert on the Cavaliers, so I'll trust you on this.
I might just being optimistic in my first post year of like not like covering this team as like my main endeavor. I'm just sort of like getting to like watch from afar. I could just be buying into the Kenny Atkinson like juice, but we'll see. All right, Detroit Pistons, the team that JB Bickerstaff now coaches. 25.5 even odds -110. Wes, I think I'm going like 27 wins as an over because I think JB will just
Okay.
make them more functional. And I think Cade's good. And I think like even just having some more normal veterans there and a coach that they're not like hating is just good for something. And having like a healthy Cade year should get them something. Will this team be good? No. But I could see like 27 wins is where I think this ends up. And that's an over.
So the Pistons won 14 games last year, 17 games the year before that, and 23 games the year before that. Winning 27 games this year
Yeah,
would
it's a
be like
lot.
winning the championship for the Detroit Pistons. But
There's a lot, yeah.
I'm going under on this, and I like a lot of what JB Bickerstaff is already doing. I've watched like both Detroit Pistons preseason games for some reason, and I love what Bickerstaff has installed. Like the offense has way more flow, way more screening, better ball movement. Jaden Ivey looks like a new person playing under JB Bickerstaff as opposed to being in the doghouse under Monty Williams. The offense looks better. Cade Cunningham does not. It's 2 preseason games. I don't want to make too much out of a molehill here, but they really need Cade to take a major leap forward. He has not been good in his career. There have been moments, there have been flashes. Cade Cunningham is strange because you watch him and you think he looks like a good NBA player, right? Like with the way he moves on the court, the passes that he can make, the reads that he can clearly make. 6'6", 220 pounds. Like you're like, wow, this guy's a good basketball player. And then you look at the numbers and you're like, this guy is one of the worst high usage players in the NBA, and that's just the stats. And I don't know that he's going to get that much better. I think he's missed 13 of his 19 shots in the preseason so far. He's had 4 shots already blocked. Like, I don't know what's going on with this guy. And so JB Bickerstaff, I think, has done the right thing in taking the ball out of his hands a little bit. He's also posting a lower usage rate than Jaden Ivey. Again, 2 preseason games, not to make too much out of that. But you could see what JB Bickerstaff is trying to do. We're going to divvy up the ball handling responsibilities. Cunningham's going to do some. Jaden Ivey's going to do some. He's even having Malik Beasley initiate some offense, which I think is pretty interesting. I like what the offense is doing, but to me, there's no player here to drag this team into wins. I think they're going to be in a lot of games. I think their games are going to be a lot more entertaining. I think they're going to look better. I think Bickerstaff is going to lay a solid foundation. But to me, they don't have that guy that's going to drive wins. They don't have a guy who's going to be high up in win shares. They don't have, unless Cade Cunningham takes a dramatic leap. And I don't know, maybe it's just like recency bias off of 2 bad preseason games for Cade Cunningham, but I just don't see it happening for him. I was totally in on Cade Cunningham this time last year. I'm pretty far out on him this year, but yeah, 14 wins last year. Like, do we expect this team to be 11 games better than they were last season?
No, that's
So I'm going under.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I'm just being weird about them for some reason. They also just like looked at their roster for a second and thought about their shooting, and they don't really have anyone who can shoot.
Yeah, and again, I like what Bickerstaff is doing. Like, he's maximized what he can do with the limited shooters on the roster, right? Like, they're starting Cunningham, Ivy, one of the shooters, either Tim Hardaway Jr. or Malik Beasley. It doesn't feel like he's landed on that. He's gone both ways in these 2 preseason games. Plus Fontecchio and then Jalen Duren, who creates legitimate vertical spacing. So I like what he's doing. He's always got one of Beasley or Hardaway on the floor, who's ostensibly a shooter. You always have one of Ivy or Cunningham on the floor, so you have a ball handler. And there's some other guys on that roster, but yeah, it's a rough watch. It's a rough watch, and I don't think Tobias Harris has played for them yet. But
Yeah, noted win.
he helps the spacing. So
Yeah, that's true. I was being glib, and you're actually being correct. All right, Indiana Pacers, 46.5 wins. Oh, even
Tough
odds
one.
again here, Wes. This is tough.
Yeah. Where are
Let me
you?
ask you. Let me ask you this about the Pacers before maybe we get into over-unders. Where do you have them as far as like if we're gonna get into season predictions like next week after, right when the season starts? When you like so far when you're organizing the East in your head, what seed do you have the Pacers at right now? Because I think this might help answer this a little bit.
yeah, I tend to think of them at like 5 or 6.
Okay. So the top 4 for you would be Boston, Knicks, Philly, Milwaukee in some order, and then it's like
In some order. And then
and then
there's that
it's like-
next tier, and I feel
Yeah.
pretty good about like Indiana, Cleveland, kind of grabbing those 5-6 seeds.
So I think I lean like a slight over in Indiana, and I think like them and Cleveland are 5-6 for me right now. Even though like the way
Yeah.
that the Vegas has it is Cleveland, Orlando, Indiana. I think I would have Orlando third of those just because of the offensive. We'll see where it ends up. because their playoff offense was just so bad that KCP is not solving that on his own. You know what I mean? It's like one of those things where like that, like I'm reverse engineering like an over basically because I think like one of those three teams is gonna hit the under, and I'm trying to like reverse engineer who it's gonna be. And in my head, I think it might be Orlando just because of. I believe in them big picture, but like their playoff offense was so bad, I think we might be kind of forgetting that a little bit.
I think that's right. That's an interesting way that you frame that. I hadn't thought about it like that, but you're absolutely right. So they've got Cleveland at 48.5, Orlando at 47.5, and Indiana at 46.5. And you're right. One of those teams is going to go under, right? There's a chance one of those teams ends up in the play-in tournament. So
one of those teams will end up in the play-in tournament unless like Milwaukee destroys itself for like the Heat or better, and then two of these teams are in the play-in tournament. One of these teams will be in the play-in tournament.
So I'm going over on the Pacers because I was asked this question, I can't remember by who the other day, but we did it. Oh yeah. So do you have more faith in Indiana's offense or Orlando's defense? And I came out thinking that I had more faith in the Pacers offense.
I do too.
I think Tyrese Halliburton is that rare player who is like Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic. There's other players like this, but is such an identity on offense, is just like a walking top 10 offensive rating, probably a top 5 offensive rating. Like as long as you have Halliburton and weapons, you're going to be fine. He's like the Patrick Mahomes of or like maybe like a Josh Allen, maybe it might be better of the NBA, where it's just like, all right, yeah, maybe there's not as much talent on this roster as some other teams, but I've got this guy as my quarterback, and he's just going to figure stuff out. Halliburton's an incredible problem solver. I also think he's going to be healthier. Remember, he had the bum hamstring towards the end of last season. That really hurt them. They have Pascal Siakam for a full season now. How many games did the Pacers win last year? They won 47. They already cleared this despite not having Siakam the full year, despite the Halliburton injury. I do think the scouting caught up to the Pacers a little bit, but that was more of a playoff thing. I still think in the regular season, they just play so much differently than every other team that it's just going to be weird when you play them. And that is an advantage when in the regular season you don't have chances, and you know this, like you don't have opportunities to scout your opponent. You don't really have like a chance to dial in on your opponent all the time. So I feel good about them going over. I have them as an over. It is a tough one. To me, the way that they go under on this is an injury. Like I feel like if they're mostly healthy, they pretty easily go over on this. And I just don't feel like I'm going to bet on. I don't feel good about betting on a Pacers injury. I just don't want to do that, so I'm going to go over.
Yeah, I tend to think offense in the NBA lasts longer than high-end defense. Like I think offense is harder. I just think talent wins out in that way more than talent wins out on defense, particularly in the modern NBA. So I'm in alignment with you on that. Let's go to your team.
Okay.
You know best in Miami Heat, 44.5 over -105. The under is -115. Wes, where are you at on the Miami Heat?
So I'm going over. And honestly, I think this is this line is pretty disrespectful. They won 46 games last year, and it wasn't even, and they weren't good. Like that was Jimmy Butler playing 60 games and like mentally playing 20. You know, it was I don't know. I understand that the top of the East got more difficult, but the Heat weren't that good against the top of the East last year, and they still won 46 games. So they did most of their work against the bottom portion of the Eastern Conference, no doubt about it. But that bottom portion of the Eastern Conference is still going to be there this year, and it might even be bigger, right? I think the Heat are going to beat up on those teams. I like everything that I've heard out of training camp from the Miami Heat. They're going to play faster. You've got Bam Adebayo shooting threes. Jimmy Butler's engaged in a contract year. He's going to want to play in this regular season. You've got a lot of stuff, I think, going on. I think Tyler Hero is going to play off the ball a little bit more, and he's going to be more efficient. If this defense is always going to be top 10. You've got Bam, Jimmy, Eric Spoelstra. It's going to be a top 10 defense no matter what. Offensively, I think there's a pretty good chance that they get closer to league average after being in the bottom 10 the last 2 years in offensive rating. And that's a formula for winning a bunch of games, especially in the Eastern Conference. If you're top 10 in defense and like 15th in offense in the Eastern Conference, you're going to win 46, 47, 48 games pretty easily. So I can go over on Miami.
I agree with you. I think this team will just like do enough to get that high level of wins, right? Like it is a team that like what they do is they grind out a bunch of wins. They have the best coach in the league. They have a Jimmy Butler who should be motivated this year. Bam is basically in the prime of his career. they seem to always find another like rotation guy out of the scrap heap and add to whatever they're doing. I believe in Jaime Jaquez as taking another step this year. Like the team feels like it is primed to win like 46 and be the team that pushes for like the 6 or sneaks into the 6 and pushes like Indiana to 7. Like that's what I feel like this Heat team in their best version of the year is like what this ends up. And I just it seems like for them, even if like the finals run was kind of a 101 thing or the bubble, like there's these kind of moments where it got higher than other years with some things that kind of push in their favor. This is just a team that seems to always kind of outperform expectations than what are set for them.
The coaching point is a great one because Eric Spoelstra is going to win 5 games that they weren't supposed to win with just out coaching the opponent in the last 5 minutes of a game. That's just going to happen. And they won 46 games last year despite having more games lost to injury than any other team in the playoffs. And they might like the Heat are not a team that is typically healthy, right? But there's a difference between being the most injured team in the league and the healthiest team in the league. And if the Heat just fall somewhere in the middle, I just think by virtue of better health luck, they should just win more than 44.5 games this year. So yeah, I feel pretty good about that over.
Let's move on to the Milwaukee Bucks. 50.5, the over's at -125, the under is at +105. I'm going over, but I do think there's a hater's case for the under. I really do think there is a hater's case for the under, just in the sense that, like, this is an older team. How good of a coach is Doc Rivers? Is Dame? Can they ever get, like, the version of Dame they really need? But, like, betting the under against Giannis just feels insane to me at the end of the day.
Yep.
I think this is about where they're going to – I think this is, like, a good number for a lot of reasons, but – I think the old is why I would look under, and I would strongly consider this is probably one I'm staying away from. But I think like 51 is about where they end up, but that's a very thin margin. It's just hard for me to look at Giannis and say, yeah, that guy's team isn't getting the over. But even if that's not the smartest thing to do,
if Giannis plays 65 games, the Bucks are going over this, and it might not even take that much, right? He played 63 games last year, and they won 49 games. So, before last year, the last time the Bucks were not on a 50-win pace was in 2018. This team just wins 50 games every year. And it was 49 last year with the year from hell, right? Damian Lillard coming into the season out of shape, late into camp because of the trade, all these things. You fire your coach, 3 different coaches within like 4 months or whatever it was. Everything that could have gone wrong for Milwaukee went wrong. But yeah, I think they're going to clear this, and I almost have this as a lock. As long as Giannis, again, plays 65-plus games, they're going to win 50-plus games. They're just going to. Giannis is that good. He's that dominant. I think he's going to come into this year kind of pissed off, right? Like losing, I think that run with Greece was great for him, but losing as early as he did, I think he's going to be really motivated. He's going to be rested. I think Damian Lillard looks great in the preseason so far. And I think Doc Rivers, by the way, like we clown on Doc Rivers all the time. That guy's also a regular season wins machine. Doc Rivers wins 48, 50 wins every year. He's the head coach. He's got his warts in the playoffs, but that's not what the over-unders are measuring here. The over-unders are about regular season wins. I feel pretty good. This is a lock for me. I have Milwaukee going over 50.5.
How much does the old scare you? Does the old nature of this team, like Brook Lopez being 36, Dame being in his mid-30s, like how much does that, Middleton being where he's at age-wise, how much does that scare you with this team?
The only person that I'm really concerned with is Middleton. But Middleton barely played last year, and this team won 49 games. So, like Brook Lopez, yeah, he's not the player he was 2-3 years ago. He's still effective. The great thing about being 7 feet tall is you're always 7 feet tall. Like Brook Lopez is still enormous, and he could still shoot threes, and he still spaces the floor. I like some of the additions they made with Torian Prince, Gary Trent Jr. It's been a rough preseason for Trent, but I think he'll bounce back. DeLon Wright, I think, was a really good addition. So I think they've gotten better on the bench. And then Giannis and Dame are going to be better together. And if Chris Middleton plays the same amount of games, slightly more games as he did in the regular season last year, that's all they really need. But yeah, age is a concern when we talk about the build of this team, no doubt about it. It's a concern when we talk about the ceiling of this team, when we're talking about playoff contending and championship contending. But in the regular season, I think they have enough.
Yeah. New York Knicks, 54.5, even odds at -110. Obviously, I think a team West that has the makings of a regular season win machine. I think in a lot of ways. I think even with adding Towns, like just another level of firepower for them. Obviously, Mitchell Robinson injury concerns. OG Anunoby always kind of an injury concern there, but I'm going over on the Knicks. I think this is like a 56-57 win team. I think this team's going to be really good, and I think just even if if Towns is anything for them, I think he's just like another way to make the regular season easy because he can be easy offense for you. Particularly, I think in a role where he can be playing off of Brunson and kind of gets to do something slightly different than what he ever did in Minnesota and just be like the spacing five with really good wing defenders. I think he's primed for a really good year, so I like the over on the Knicks.
I'm going under on this.
Okay.
I'm going under. I think we're drinking the Kool-Aid on the Knicks a little bit too much. You have a great point with Karl-Anthony Towns. There is just a roll out of bed baseline production with him that is going to lift the team and help the team in the regular season. Between him and Jalen Brunson, you've got two guys who are going to be all NBA candidates. And when you've got two guys like that, you're probably in the mix for around 50 wins. I think 54.5 is insane as an over-under. This team won 50 games last year. They have not been a regular season wins machine before this. And I understand they made a lot of changes. You added Mikal Bridges, you add Karl-Anthony Towns. You also lost a lot of depth that helped them win games in the regular season. I don't trust OG Anunoby to play 50 games this year. I don't trust him to play 50, 60 games this year. I think that's a big part of how this defense now is built. Mitchell Robinson is already hurt. I also think it's going to be a little clunky to start. I think they did the right thing in making the Karl-Anthony Towns trade. The more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, you know what, that was a pretty good trade for them. We talked about it earlier this week. But I think it's going to be a little clunky to start in terms of finding chemistry, building kind of what it is that they want to do. And their first 10 games are pretty tough in the regular season. They can kind of come out of the gates 4-6 or something like that, a little bit behind the 8 ball. It wouldn't be surprising. 54.5 is a little too rich for me. If this was at 50.5, I would feel better at the over. This team feels like more like 51, 52, and then primed to finally advance past the second round. But I don't know. I think like the conversation with the Knicks has gotten too out of whack. Like we act like this team has been in the Eastern Conference Finals. They haven't made it out of the second round in the East. You know, it's like,
yeah,
we'll see. You know, they've been fine in the regular season. They've been fine in the playoffs, but 54.5, it's a little too much for me.
Yeah, I think it's possible. Even if I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, I just there's something about their makeup that I quite like.
I go slight under on this. I'm not like trying to shit on them. Like I go slight on like 51, 52. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. That makes sense. All right, Orlando Magic 47.5 over -120. The unders a +110. Wes, I'm just going to slight under just because I think picking Cleveland and picking or Indiana to go over, picking Miami to go over. I just think by process of elimination, I think I have to go under on Orlando.
So you could also go the other way and just take the over on all of them and just be wrong on one of them and just eat it. Yeah. But this one was maybe the toughest one for me because the Orlando Magic won that many games and made the playoffs for the first time since Dwight Howard. It's very difficult to know if that's sustainable or not. I do think their defense is for real. There's no reason for me to think that defense is not going to be top 3 in the NBA again in defensive rating. I do have real concerns about their offense. It wasn't good last year. It could be even worse this year. It might be better. I have no idea. I have no idea what to make of this offense. But if they basically come out and say, we're still going to be in the bottom 10 in offensive rating and we're still going to be top 3 in defensive rating, we kind of know what that is. It's 47 wins. And Vegas put the over-under at 47.5. This one's pretty tough for me. They added KCP. I tried to do the math problem where they won 47 games last year. They add KCP, who had 4.8 win shares last year for the Denver Nuggets. You add those together, and they go over. I know it doesn't work that way. You're going under. I'll go over for the sake of being different, but this one is really tough.
Yeah, I think it's straight up. I think all these teams in the middle of the East are the hardest to peg here because they could break. All these teams could break. Yep. In different ways, right? Like Cleveland could. That's
kind of why I'm just taking the over on all of them. I'm just hoping I get 3 out of 5 right. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like compared to the West, where it's like, where I think I delineate the East and the West this year. West is I think there's like teams in the West that I will still feel good about, even if their win total is a little bit lower than I thought, just because I think the West is so good. Whereas I think in the East, you could have teams that I feel worse about, and their seasons just like go sideways. And I think it's all these teams in the middle that are aiming to be a top 6 seed and maybe make the second round or push for the conference finals in an upset or something. Like that's their window. And there's just like a lot of, I think there's like a lot on the line for these teams, and there's like some volatility. Maybe not like for Cleveland or Orlando. Like those teams maybe aren't the most volatile, but there's some potential like repercussions if things don't go a certain way this year.
Yeah, I just looked this up too. Orlando was 21-14 in clutch games last year, which I think is higher than I thought it would be, given their lack of shot creation. They're well coached. They have a good defense. That stuff obviously matters. But
Paolo
they didn't have
Paolo pulled a bunch of stuff out last year that was like pretty miraculous.
And that could probably still happen, right? That's sort of Paolo's deal. That's kind of how he plays. He's like an isolation scorer. So maybe that if Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner take a leap, we can look so dumb for even considering the under on this. Like there's a world where both of those guys just totally get to all-star level, or Paolo's competing for like third team All-NBA, and they still have one of the top 5 defenses in the league, and they're a 50-win team. Like that is 100% on the table with this Magic team. It also isn't, right? Like, also their offense was so bad last year that I don't know how you can have any faith in it at all. So we'll see what happens.
Philadelphia 76ers up next. 52.5 wins over at plus 105. The unders at minus 125. This is my hardest one, Wes, because
it's a tough one.
On one hand, I think there's a really good case for the over because even if Embiid plays 55 games or something, they have Maxey and a good supporting cast, and they have Paul George. Like, they're in a really good spot with 2 stars otherwise. On the other hand, Embiid is historically like such a driver for wins for this team that when he sits, they tend to just lose more. And even if Drummond's eating minutes and whatnot, like that's just a big drop-off. This is probably one I would stay away from a betting perspective. This is not one I don't think I'm actually going to throw any units on. I think if I were to play it, though, if I'm going to talk myself into anything, the over is where I would play just because you have some upside there. And I do think it's very possible this is like a 55-win team. But my gut tells me the under makes more sense just because Embiid's going to sit some and rest this year. And it's about the playoffs for them. If they're the 4 seed and win 50 games, that's a really good outcome for them in terms of their championship equity.
47 wins last year, 54 wins the year before that, 51 wins the year before that. They were 31-8. When Joel Embiid played last season. Yeah. That's basically a 70-win pace.
They're outrageous. The Sixers are outrageous when Embiid is on the floor. It is.
And then they got better, right? Like, and so because they added Paul George and everything else they did this offseason. I'm going the over on this. It was tough for me too. I do think that, look, as long as Joel Embiid, yeah, he's going to be on a maintenance program, it sounds like, or maybe not a maintenance program, but it sounds like everything out of Joel Embiid, Nick Nurse, Paul George, all these guys are talking about, hey, we're not going to go full tilt in the regular season. We want to just make sure that we're healthy for the playoffs. There's a strategic way to do that. I don't see them benching Embiid and Paul George and Tyrese Maxey every night.
No.
Right? You probably give one guy a night off, play the other 2, and then you kind of do round robin that way. Where, all right, Paul George, you get the night off, Embiid, Maxey, you're out there. Embiid, you get the night off. Paul George, Maxey, you're out there. Maxey's always going to play. He's young. He can handle it. So you can kind of strategically do it where you're getting that rest but still winning enough games, because I do think it's still important for Philadelphia to be one of the top 2 seeds in the Eastern Conference this year.
Yeah.
Like I think you want to be opposite the Boston Celtics as long as possible in the Eastern Conference. So like that 2nd seed is not nothing. That is something to go for. And I think Philadelphia is going to go for it while not going for it too strongly. So at 52.5, I'm going to take the over here because this is one of those ones where I would feel really dumb about taking the under, and this team has won 50 games by March, and you're just like, well, that was stupid. So I'm going to go over on this.
Another hard one for me, Wes, is the Toronto Raptors, our second to last one, 29.5, overs at minus 120, the unders at plus 100. I just don't really know what to feel about this Toronto team. I just 25 wins last year, 23 wins in terms of the Pythagorean wins last year. You know, RJ Barrett's hurt now. You know, Quickly is, what are you getting out of Quickly? You know, what is Grady Dick in year 2? Are they trading, Bruce Brown or Boucher at some point?
Mm-hmm.
I think I kind of just feel like this is another year where they're kind of playing the long game, and I lean the under just because, like, why do they need to push for, like, 33 wins this year?
Masai Ujiri already came out and said we're rebuilding this year.
Okay.
So when
I
you're
feel good
talking about
this.
making trades, like, yeah, they're probably going to trade Bruce Brown. They're probably going to trade a couple of these guys. I'm going under on this, and I feel like the only way they go over is if Scotty Barnes has a huge breakout year. Like if Scotty Barnes gets to borderline all-star in the Eastern Conference, which you could argue he was there last year, but it feels like it would be Scotty Barnes driving this. You already mentioned the RJ Barrett injury. He's going to be out for the rest of the preseason with the shoulder injury. Does that linger into the regular season? He's going to be reevaluated after the preseason. I know we're only talking about RJ Barrett, but he's a big part of this team. And Emmanuel Quickley is a big part of this team. I think Emmanuel Quickley is fine. I just don't know how many other great players are on this roster. I'm going the under.
Yeah, feel very weird about Toronto. All right, the Washington Wizards last, 20.5. The over is at minus 125. The under is at plus 105. Brogdon's already hurt.
Yep.
I think this team is full of not good players. Traded Avgia.
Yep.
Their big offseason move was getting Sadiq Bey, who's probably not going to play this year. Go in the under.
Yeah, they won what? 14 games last year? 15 games last year? Did they get 6 games better somehow? I don't see it. This team stinks.
I feel so bad for Wizards fans. Like, they don't get to keep those like beautiful cherry blossom jerseys, and their team sucks.
Yeah, we've already talked about this. I think if you get a good City Edition jersey that everybody likes, you just lock it in. You just have it. Like that's what should be the case there, and they should have those cherry blossom jerseys. Look, they added Jonas Valanciunas also. That was another big offseason move for them. They're going to trade him probably before the trade deadline. They also might trade Kyle Kuzma, who's the best player on that team right now. They could trade him before the trade deadline. They lost Tyus Jones, who is such an important part of that offense. The reason I'm taking the under is because everything you're hearing out of Washington right now is we're giving the ball to Jordan Poole. He's going to run our offense. That's going to be a problem for the Washington Wizards this year. Jordan Poole is not somebody who runs your offense, okay? And you don't have now the backup like you did last year when they tried to have Jordan Poole run the offense. It didn't work, and they said, let's just have Tyus Jones run the offense, and let's make Jordan Poole a sixth man or play off of Tyus Jones. There's no other option for them. It's Jordan Poole or bust, which is terrifying. Johnny Davis has looked pretty good, by the way, in preseason and in training camp. We're getting good stuff out of Johnny Davis, but again, not trusting him to get this team over 20 wins. This team is going to stink. They might not even win 15 games this year. They're going to trade all their good players if they're smart before the deadline. I am hammering the under on the Washington Wizards. It's ridiculous that we went 20.5 on them.
They are bad. That's a lot of Cooper Flag teams. Eastern Conference is what I'm getting after we did this.
Yep.
And Ace Bailey and all the other guys in that 2025 class East. Really, the way that all these teams, Wes, like in the middle, get over is they all just beat the shit out of the Wizards and the Pistons and the Raptors and stuff. Like,
those are going to be there, right? Like the Brooklyn Nets are going to stink. The Bulls are going to stink. The Pistons are going to stink. The Toronto Raptors will probably stink. The Wizards will definitely stink. That's 5 teams right there that teams are just going to beat up on all season long. And so, yeah, we might end up hitting the overs on a lot of those other good teams because I feel like some of the East was sold short. But I feel like the bottom of the East was almost given too much credit.
I think it's just like you look at historically, it's like really like glaring when teams win 14 games because like it just doesn't happen quite as much as you think it might, considering the quality of some of these teams. But boy, there's some teams that I just think absolutely suck in the East this year, like just absolutely jobbers on the schedule. Stuff. We'll end there on the Washington Wizards and the Eastern Conference. That's our over-unders. Check out our West over-unders pod if you haven't checked that out as well. We'll be doing, we'll do some check-ins maybe on these throughout the year, and we'll also be doing betting content over on our TikTok and Instagram pages using odds from BetMGM all season long. So check them out. Use our bonus code JustBasketball. Back next week with more Just Basketball. Have a great week, everyone. Enjoy the weather. Stay safe if you're in the hurricane zones, and we'll talk to you soon.